Hello and welcome to Outdoorsy, the podcast that is redefining the word for everybody and reclaiming it for everyone. I'm your host, Madeline. Welcome to the season finale of Outdoorsy. This is the season 1 finale. Season 2 will be coming out in February. I cannot say enough how thankful I am for everybody who has listened to this podcast and supported it through this first season. I cannot believe how much people have responded to this. It's been so delightful to see. I have had the opportunity to connect with so many incredible guests that I have learned so much from. I hope you all have learned so much from them as well. Thank you to everybody who took their time to listen, to be on the podcast. Your support just means the absolute world to me. One of the most fun things that happened because of this podcast was the launch of the Outdoorsy Discord channel. I am so excited to have so many people in there. Let's see how many people we have in here now. There are over 90 people in the Discord channel, which is just absolutely amazing. If you want to gain access to the Discord community, it's mostly pictures of our dogs on hikes, but I swear there's useful information in there as well. Just go to patreon.com/outdoorsy and you can join the Discord as well. Specifically, I want to give a couple of shout outs. I want to give a shout out to Alex, Lisa, Aubriana, Jeep Girl, Jeremy, and Jesse, and all of the rest of the people that are on there. Oh my gosh, there's so many of you. I wish I could shout you all out by name, but that would take a really long time. Thank you all for being active in the Discord. I'm just so happy to have this little online community, especially when the future of social media apps is so precarious and up in the air right now. Just so many incredible people. Now, I don't want to get too far in the weeds of just rambling about anything because we do have an amazing episode coming up for you just in a couple of seconds with Parker, also known as KWEEN WERK. They are so incredible. But one last reminder that before we go on this little break, please be sure to go connect with me on all of the other social media platforms, especially since so many of you all found me through TikTok. We don't know what's happening with TikTok in the future, so go connect with me on Instagram, on Threads, on YouTube, all of the places. I'll be publishing regularly on all of those platforms, even while we're on the break for the podcast. You can find me at Madeline Wilson Photo on all of the things, but I also have all the links in the show notes. So let's stay connected. No matter what happens with TikTok, we will still find a way to really foster this online community. And again, if you don't want to join any of those other social media channels, just join us over on the Discord. The Discord and the Patreon are also how you're going to know about upcoming Cozy Camping Club meetups, which I am so excited about. Patreon.com/outdoorsy. Come join us over there. But enough about all of that. Thank you all for tuning into season 1. Please enjoy this finale. I am so excited for you to listen to it. I am so honored to introduce to you today our guest, Parker. You may also know them as KWEEN WERK, a very powerful voice in the intersection of environmental justice, social justice, and outdoor activism. As the CEO of Eco-Inclusive Strategies, the founder of Summit for Action, a self-proclaimed social media diva, TEDx speaker, and activist, Parker is dedicated to equality and inclusion, conservation in outdoor recreation. They use their platform to challenge the status quo and disrupt the idea that only a certain type of person belongs in these spaces. Their mission with KWEEN WERK in particular is about showing up in your bodies, no matter what shape, size, color, gender, and ability you are, and you deserve representation and a place in outdoor recreation and activities. Parker tackles complex issues like racism, ableism, and sexism through head-on activism, education, and just truly inspiring change, giving their followers the tools they need to advocate for inclusivity. Their passion and authenticity bring a much-needed voice of representation and empowerment in the world, both online and in real life. I cannot wait to dive into their story and their work. So Parker, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here. I'm going to have to hire you to follow me around and give introductions for me.
I'll just be your hype woman in the back always. I'd be honored, truly. I'd be so happy to do that. The best part of this podcast is I just get to talk to so many amazing people and just hype them up and then give them a platform to talk, and I just get the benefit of absorbing all the knowledge that you have to share. It's the best job ever.
Oh, I love that.
So the first thing I always ask people, Parker, is how do you define outdoorsy?
Yeah, I would say that my definition of outdoorsy has kind of changed over the years. But as today, right, I would say that being outdoorsy is just enjoying being outside in nature. And it doesn't have to be a certain activity. It doesn't have to be, a certain thing. But if you like, spending time on a park bench outside to, climbing a 14er, I think you're outdoorsy.
I cannot agree more. You said that your idea of what outdoorsy means or that definition has changed over time. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Oh my goodness, yes. Okay, so I think this really had a lot to do with some of the intersections of my identity as a Black, femme, queer, fat person. And never seeing people that looked like me in the outdoors. And as a kid, I honestly thought that being outside hiking, rock climbing, that was white people stuff. Like that's the representation that I always had. And I thought that in order to be outdoorsy, you either needed to be doing some like extreme outdoor activity or like the other side, the like naturalist side, you need to be able to name all the scientific names of all the plants and animals in order to be considered someone who, really loved nature, was outdoorsy. And over the years, I realized that that definition was really narrow and that it really wasn't the case, right? The only thing it takes for something to be an outdoor activity is for it to be happening outside, And so over the years, my definition of outdoorsy changed, my definition of someone who was a conservationist or an environmentalist changed, right? And I think that those changes are for the better, right? Because the more connection that people can have to the outdoors and the nature, the better job we would do in protecting it.
Yeah, I cannot agree more. I think that journey that you just described is going to resonate with so many people listening to this podcast because they feel the same. Like they have some piece of their identity where it's prevented them from seeing themselves represented outdoors. So then you just kind of don't think that it's for you. So I think that resonates with a lot of people. But before we get into like the serious topics, I want to hear like what do you like to do outdoors?
Oh my goodness, so much. So, let's start with the little activities, like just sitting in the backyard with my kids, or going for walks around my neighborhood. Some more, mid-range things. I like hiking. And it's fun to me. I don't like being in pain. I don't like struggling for my life. But I found out that hiking doesn't have to be that. And so I love hiking and seeing beautiful places. And I'll struggle. I'll sweat some, depending on where the spot is going to be. But that's not my norm. I've also been trying some different outdoor activities like skiing. And so far have taken a couple of skiing courses. I'm going back at the beginning of next year with my family to do more skiing, and I'm excited about that. That's something that I never thought that I would do as a, plus size Black femme. But I saw another Black woman who is a social media influencer that I follow, and we both have been kind of orbiting each other in this outdoor social media space. And they have a similar body build to me, and they were skiing. And I was like, oh, if they can do it, maybe I should try, and like signed up for a lesson. So I'm excited to give that a try. And maybe this time I'll make it off the bunny hill, but we'll see.
That sounds amazing. And even if you stay on the bunny hill, like that still counts as skiing,
Yes,
it's
it
still
does. Yes,
as long as you're having fun. Oh, I love it. So how did you then get into all of the advocacy work that you're doing? Because obviously, like, for anybody who's unfamiliar with Parker, I mean, I just recently your TEDx talk was published on YouTube, and it is phenomenal. You speak about, how historically marginalized people have been restricted access to even just clean air because of redlining and all these historical terrible things that have happened. It's still prevalent to this day today, how impacted marginalized communities are in terms of their access to the outdoors, in terms of access to just clean air. I mean, these basic things that we think so many of us take for granted. But that's just like a sliver of the work that you've been doing.
And so
So
many
I'd
people
love
don't know history.
Yes,
Sorry, go
yes.
ahead.
No, yeah. I mean, it's so important to talk about. But like I was saying, like that's a huge, important thing to talk about. But that's just like a sliver of the work that you're doing. So I'd love for you to tell our listeners, like, what are you doing now? How did you get to this point in terms of your advocacy work? Like, and all of the other amazing things that you've done in your professional career. I'd love for you to just kind of tell us about your journey.
Yeah. Oh goodness. This is just like a 40-minute podcast, right? Or 20 minutes.
Yeah. Maybe you can come back and do a part two.
Yes. It has been a long road for me going from not being someone that considered themselves outdoorsy in the least to doing the work that I do today. I grew up in the Bronx, New York, and there people weren't having those types of conversations with me about the outdoors and the environment, but I noticed them myself. And so I noticed that there were issues with the environment myself. So I would walk around collecting aluminum cans with my dad. And that was back when you could get 5 cents a can. For the young'uns, they used to give you money when you gave back those empty cans. And so we would collect to get money for my family. And along the way, I noticed the trash that was on the ground and the things that we were leaving behind. And I started to ask my parents about that, and my mom had no answers for me. She knew that it was an issue, but she was like, I don't know if this was like frustration or my first call to action. But my mom was like, I don't know what to do about that. Why don't you write a letter to the New York Times? And so I did. I wrote this letter at 9 years old to the New York Times. I typed it up, type on my dad's typewriter, and made several versions of it. And you can see that I had a passion there. It like starts off, dear people, we're polluting our planet. Like it was like cared so much at the age of 9, even though I never had an environmental education course. Those things weren't topics of conversation in my community, which I think I always like to start there because we have stories that we tell about people in urban environments that they don't care as much about the environment, or we have to teach them to love nature. But I gained my sense of place on the city streets of New York and wanted to protect my community because I saw something going on. We then moved to South Georgia when I was going into high school. Total culture shock. But I got involved in 4-H, which is, if you're in rural areas, your county extension office and cooperative extension you might be familiar with. But I went to camp as a 4-H'er and did more kind of like projects around recycling and things like that. And still during that time, I did not know that my career was an option, right? But I did that work. I went to school and got my bachelor's degree in anthropology. And when I left my, school and education, I was kind of looking for something to do. And I looked around and I was like, I don't know my next steps. But someone suggested, and had told me that the camps that I went to as a kid also did environmental education programs, and that you could have a job there if you have a degree. So I kind of fell into this career in environmental education because they provided housing in residential environmental ed centers. They gave you all the materials that you needed to learn and teach. Sometimes you would get some food and meals. And so as a young 20-something, it was a good placeholder. But after being in the field for a while, I was like, oh, is this my career? And so I stuck with it. Um, During that time, though, I really started to see and realize that there weren't a whole lot of people that looked like me. And I got a lot of messages even then that um, I was not what was expected or the right person in the space. I had people who would tell me because I didn't come up in this kind of naturalist background, that was not as good of an educator, even though I was using my own background and connection to tell stories that connected to different communities. Because even though I was the only person of color on the education staff, we often got groups and kids of color that would come in that, I was able to connect with because I had shared lived experiences with them. I would lead like kayaking tours and would be standing there with the boats waiting for my people who signed up to show up, and they would show up and look around and then be like, oh, who's leading our kayaking tour today? Right? It was like they looked right through me. They didn't expect me to be there, and they didn't think that I would have the skills to be able to do that. I didn't fit the type. Right. And so throughout my career, I got these messages that I wasn't what was expected, but also I had some great mentors and people who told me that my voice was needed and necessary. Um, and so I went back to school. I got my master's of science and natural resources with a focus on environmental education. My project was around watershed education, but also I wanted to figure out what tools were needed for the teachers to be able to do that work well. And also another thing that interests me that I kind of studied and looked into during my college courses was inclusive science communication. How do we create scientific messages that speak to a variety of communities and speak to their lived experiences, and also community engagement? So it was during that time that I formed my organization, Eco-Inclusive Strategies, and started doing that kind of on the side. I do training, speaking engagements, but I had um, main jobs. I was director of education at a marine science site. I came out to Colorado to take a vice president position at an invertebrate museum. I was kind of doing this teaching, but also doing this work. And then 2020 kind of changed everything, right? It might have stayed a side hustle, but it was during that time that a couple of things happened to me. One, I co-founded a tech startup called Inclusive Guide, which is kind of like Yelp, but for inclusion. And we, during that time and during like George Floyd and all of those things, we realized that there was such a need for people to be able to identify safe and welcoming spaces, that we wanted to be able to bring this to the public. I also saw a big need for the work that I was doing with eco-inclusive strategies. I had been doing Summit for Action. I started it the year before the pandemic, which is a yearly summit where we tackle issues at the intersection of the environment and social justice. And then also during the pandemic, I became an accidental social media influencer, and people started really listening but reaching out to me and talking to me about my messages around the environment and getting outdoors. And I realized that there was such a need for this work that I'm doing now that I needed to be doing it full time. So I stepped out of my day job and started doing these work, then putting all these different, I like to say I wear a number of different head wraps instead of hats, putting on all of these different roles. And to be honest, in my career, I've been doing this, working in the environmental realm for over 20 years, but I feel like this is the most impactful thing that I could be doing to save the planet, because we don't have everyone at the table when we're talking about climate justice and environmental issues. And we don't have people understanding that we need all voices to create solutions that will really solve those problems. And so if I can get people interested in the environment and interested in social justice and environmental justice issues, especially the ones close to home, I feel like I would be doing a good job.
You've had an incredible journey.
Yeah. Long.
Yeah. You've done so much. And like you said, you wear many head wraps. It's incredible. I don't know how you do it all, honestly. It's amazing. One of the biggest barriers to getting outdoors for a lot of people is that they feel intimidated because either, like you said, they haven't seen themselves represented, or they've tried to get outdoors and they've had people react weirdly to them, or they haven't felt like they belonged in these spaces that traditionally haven't been designed for them. So, like, if you're comfortable sharing, I'd love to dig in a little bit more about your story about belonging in the outdoorsy community and how you've navigated that despite all of the things that you've run up against.
Yeah, I really had to kind of carve out that space for me. And hopefully I'm carving it out for others so they don't have to fight as hard. Um, when I first started my career as an environmental educator, I felt like I needed to really change myself to fit in. I felt like I couldn't wear head wraps. I felt like I needed to go out and buy a fleece or Patagonia or something. Like I felt like the way that I showed up was not what people would accept. And so I hid pieces of myself so that I could fit into that like outdoorsy category. Um, and I did a lot of years of that, and I realized that that didn't really contribute to my enjoyment, because we all want to show up just as we are, right?
Right.
And I have gotten so many messages. I still get messages, when I go hiking. I have people comment about the bright colors that I wear, ask me if I know what I'm doing, if it's my first time hiking. I showed up to a park early to do a sunrise hike with a friend in an unfamiliar park, and found out that you couldn't actually park your car until after 9, and we were there way before. So I was fine with that. But the park ranger who was telling me this, I then asked, okay, but can we still go? Can I still go in before the parking lot opens? And they kind of looked at me and they looked at my vehicle and they said, well, yeah, the park is open before sunrise, as long as you're not doing anything nefarious. Right. And so there's this like view, and I think other people, I've heard it from other people of color, being in the outdoors, that because we're not expected to be in that space, that sometimes our motives for being in that space are questioned, and people think that folks are there to not enjoy nature but to do something else. And so when I get those messages, when I'm out trying to enjoy, when I get the messages that I'm not expected, it can be really difficult. But I have learned more and more that I can't let that stop me. And hopefully I'm providing the representation so others feel the same. We can't let people's view of who should be in those spaces dictate whether or not we show up, and that we have to be boldly ourselves so that we can start to change that kind of tide of who people expect to see in those spaces. when I do my courses, my DEI courses, and I'm talking about conservation or I do a video, sometimes I get the question like, what do you mean? Like nature is for everybody. Like, are you trying to say the trees are racist or whatever, right? But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the same societal issues that are in our day to day that follow people into the outdoors because other people are in the outdoors. If I was just there with the trees and the raccoons all day, I could be just fine. But it's how we treat each other in those spaces.
Yeah, I mean, even just I was reading this article because I just did a podcast episode about Leave No Trace, and I was reading this article by Melanin Basecamp, and it was this kind of critique of Leave No Trace of like, yes, it's good to have these principles and stuff. However, we need to be more cognizant of how we're policing this.
Yes.
Because people in Black and brown bodies, people in historically marginalized bodies, oftentimes are policed far more harshly than white people. And they use the example of like being at a campground and there's like a group of people talking really loudly or maybe playing some music. They're like, the camp host is going to walk past the group of white people and not say anything, but they're going to see the Black people because they don't like typically see Black people hanging out at a campsite. They're going to tell them to be quiet. Whereas the white people, they would have been just like, oh, this is just normal behavior for a campsite.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, that's so true. Again, it's like, yeah, you are existing in the outdoors. The trees aren't racist, but people exist outdoors and you're going to encounter people no matter what. And even just little things like that about policing and enforcing Leave No Trace, good intentions of like, yeah, Leave No Trace should be followed and da-da-da-da. Still, racism still seeps into even that.
Seeps into it. And myself and my friends have had similar situations where, there's a group campground over, they're playing country music and, it's fine. But if we were to play, and I don't play, my musical selections in the outdoors, but I've had friends that have, and they've gotten, talked to.
Yep.
And it's even interesting. Sorry, this is a little off topic, but my partner is white, and loves rap music, listens to rap music. And it's so interesting because I have a worry and a fear that's kind of been drilled into me that if I show up in these outdoor spaces, I better be acting a certain way because, or I'm going to, get policed, get questioned, or prove a stereotype that some people might have. But we were staying in a cabin and on a campground. He was on the back porch, playing was one of its, music. He was drawing and doing some nature journaling and listening to music on a little speaker. And it wasn't that loud, but I flew out of the cabin in a tizzy. Like I was so worried and so upset. And I was like, no, we have to turn off the music. You can't have that. And it led to a really great conversation because that's not something that he has to police himself in regularly, and he felt very comfortable about it and felt that we were in a pretty populated area because there were cabins around and that it was low enough that it wasn't disturbing, the next cabin over or the next campground over. But for me, it was like, no, we can't act like this because we're going to get in trouble. But he hasn't gotten in trouble doing that in his body in those spaces.
Yeah, you're held to such a higher standard. Like you are having to think about all of these other things that other people don't have to think about. And it's just, I wish it wasn't the case, but it is. And it's important to recognize that. And I think one of the things I'd love for you to give some insight and advice maybe to our listeners is I think that there's a lot of people listening to this podcast and who follow me and who follow you who are like, great, it's awesome to hear you talk about how you've been able to overcome some of this or how you are like, well, I'm going to show up boldly regardless and kind of prove you wrong, prove that I belong out here. I think that there's a lot of people who like aren't there yet.
Yeah.
Like they're scared for the maybe not even scared for their personal safety. Like they don't even fear violence, but they just fear like the comments or the microaggressions or the like double take looks at them on the trail or whatever it might be. Like, what advice do you have for people who just aren't quite there yet, where they're like, I'm scared. I don't know if I still feel like I belong. I want to be there. Like, what advice would you give them?
You know, I know that it's scary because it was scary for me getting started. And so it's totally a valid um, feeling. And I think that there's lots of ways that we can kind of either, push past the feeling or work to be more comfortable. And one is like going with other people. There are so many groups around the nation that are working to get, especially people of color, but also folks who are fat, folks who have disabilities, folks who are queer, into the outdoors. And so if you are fearful of going on your own, I would say look for one of those groups or get a friend to go with you. Look at the resources that are out there. One of the reasons that we started Inclusive Guide is my co-founder is a hunter and is also a Black woman and had hunting mentors that were white men. And they kept getting, these hunting mentors kept saying, oh yeah, you can go to this spot. You can, work on this person's land. You can hunt over here. And she was not as comfortable. She's like, if I show up with my gun on someone's private land, I don't care if they have let their private land be hunted on, right? I am going to be viewed differently than some of the other people that I hunt with. And so we decided, the Inclusive Guide came out of that fear that she had because she was like, is there a space that I can go where I know other people of color have been and have had good experiences? And so we set out to create this thing that was, kind of like a modern day green book. And we knew that it didn't need to be only for Black people, but we needed it for all these marginalized identities to be able to find safe spaces. And we expanded it past just outdoor spaces, but that is where we started. And we had some great partnerships with like local parks and other organizations that really want to know how inclusive are our spaces? What are the experiences people have? And whether those experiences are with other park rangers or with the neighborhood or the community that the park is in, like having, that ability to know what people are feeling. And so I would say reach out to people who have been there or look for resources where you can see what are experiences that people have had and what might it be like for you?
That's amazing advice. I think that's so important. So many of these things go unspoken, and that's why I'm maybe this will get me canceled, but that's why I'm a big proponent of gossip. I think gossip can be really helpful, right? Because
Yes.
you gossip, you can tell each other through the grapevine of like, that place is safe, that place is not safe. I had a bad experience in that
Yes.
area. Like, that is the beauty of gossip sometimes, but what you've done is like made it much more constructive and organized in this way.
Gossip is what has kept a lot of people safe for a
Yeah.
long time. You have an experience and you tell other people in your community, and this is
Yep.
that on a larger scale. And it's not just the bad places. We want to know and support the places that are welcoming, that are doing the work, so that people can see that there's a value in being inclusive, that, yeah.
Yeah. Because when you are more inclusive, everybody benefits. Like
Yes.
nobody doesn't benefit from
That
that.
part.
So
That part.
yeah, we want to uplift those things too. So I love that. I hope that everybody listening goes and uses that resource. And what you're saying about finding niche communities too has been kind of a through line in a lot of these podcast interviews. Is there's so many different organizations that do exist that do a fantastic job of intentionally creating spaces and communities for specific identities. And
Yeah.
if you belong to a certain community, like chances are there's a hiking group that is specifically targeted for you. So yeah, I'm really happy that those things exist. Before we wrap up, I do want to touch on this one other piece that's kind of more topical and timely, just because you have all this experience with, you know, kind of social justice and environmental activism. And in today's climate, literally and figuratively, those things are going to be an uphill battle more than ever. And I think that a lot of people are feeling kind of hopeless, and like a lot of this is out of their control, and they don't know how to feel like they could make a difference. So I just am wondering, like, what do you have to say to anybody who's listening that wants to keep fighting this good fight right along with you and doing all the right things, but is feeling discouraged about, you know, the potential future? Like, what advice, pieces of encouragement, like what would you say to everybody right now?
Yeah. You know, it's really overwhelming, right? And the systems that we're up against were built to protect profits over people and nature. But systems are made by people and they can be changed by people. I feel like we have seen some movements led by communities most impacted by environmental harms and push for real change. Indigenous land back efforts, environmental justice policies, grassroots organizing. And so I think we have to continue to focus on what we can control, you know, like I it is so much easier for the agenda that is ongoing to continue when we lose hope. And so local action matters, communities coming together to protect their water, their air, their public land is where the heart of this work is. And we can't let the power of connection, education, and resistance be underestimated. We also have to remember that this fight isn't new. People have been resisting oppression for centuries, you know, and we're standing on the shoulders of giants who never gave up. And that's really powerful. And that is what empowers me to not give up, right? And I know that it feels heavy, and there are days when I feel it too, but I think hope isn't like this soft, fluffy thing. Hope is a choice. It's an act of rebellion. It's saying that you don't get to steal my vision for a better future with the oppression and the things that you are doing. And so we have to fight back, and we have to look to others that are fighting back, because we can't do it alone. So we need to build a community. I encourage people, build your community, find your people. Let's take care of one another, because it's going to be more and more necessary that we are taking care of each other locally. And our hope will live in those relationships, and it lives in action, and it lives in seeing the change that we can make in someone's life, in our community, in our world, even if it seems small.
That's incredible advice. Thank you so much. I feel a lot stronger just hearing you say that. And I like what you said of, you know, hope is not this like fluffy abstract thing. I mean, it's the fight and the fire that's in us, and it's our choice to continue feeling that hope. And
Yes.
I hope that everybody listening really takes that to heart, because that's incredible advice. So thank you.
My pleasure. I'm glad it resonated some.
I'm like, you know, we're all kind of just grasping onto any like little thing right now.
Yeah.
And it is very empowering, truly, to hear words from somebody like you who is doing the work every day. Like, you are in the weeds, doing the work, boots on the ground, like deep in all of this. So to hear someone who's so involved and so knowledgeable and educated on what's been going on and what's to come say, hope is still here, keep holding on to hope, that is so meaningful and important for people to hear, right? Because it's easy for me to be like, oh yeah, we can have hope. I don't know anything. I don't know anything at all. Like I'm just a silly woman with a podcast. Like you are doing the work. And so it's really important for us to hear from people like you who have so much more knowledge to say, yes, we can keep fighting. We still have hope. There is a brighter future ahead. And also that piece you said about this isn't a new fight,
Yeah.
this isn't new. It just is slightly different right now, but we can continue to do this work and we always have been. So thank you for that. And thank you for your time. Before we wrap up, I want to make sure that everybody knows where to find you, what you've got coming up. Tell our listeners what's next for you and where they can find you and connect with you.
Yeah, they definitely can find me on the social media, in these social media streets. KWEEN WERK, KWEENWERK, so spelled a little bit differently, but KWEEN stands for Keep Widening Environmental Engagement Narratives. So they can connect on Threads. That is Threads the new TikTok? I don't know. Threads, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. I'm on all of them. Not X. And, coming up, if you're in the Denver metro area, I'm so excited. We've started this new yearly event called Mother Earth is Burning Kiki Ball. And it's rooted in the ballroom traditions that came out of New York. If you've seen the show Pose, then you will know a little bit of what I'm talking about. We have ballroom categories, everything from oil spill to natural disasters. And if you're in the Denver metro area, come or look or walk. I also have, different speaking engagements come up. And if people want to check them out, they can go to ecoinclusive.org to check it out.
Awesome. Well, I will have links to all of those things in the show notes too. So anybody who's listening can click through and go engage with Parker and follow along their journey. And any final words, Parker? Any other words of wisdom for people listening who feel like they're a little bit braver after listening to you and want to take that step and start adventuring outdoors and start reclaiming that identity for themselves?
Yeah, I know if you haven't seen yourself as being outdoorsy, it's probably because those are the messages that have been given to you. And if you feel like the fight for the environment is hopeless, that's because those are the messages that have been given to you. And I know the system is not set up for a lot of people, but we have each other and we have the power of collective action. And even though the fight isn't easy, it's worth it. And while we're here, while we're breathing, we all have a responsibility to dream bigger, to fight harder, and to leave the world a little bit better than we found it. So take a deep breath, lean into your community. Let's get to work,
I love it. Thank you so much. This was amazing. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for sharing your knowledge with everybody. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So with that, I'm going to wrap things up. Thank you for everybody for listening. I hope that until the next time we connect, you are able to get outdoors in whatever way feels good to you and makes sense for you. And just remember that you belong out there.